never start reading a series with the intention of hating it in the future. I try to be as neutral and as unbiased as I possibly can be, up until the final chapter of the story, especially for weekly manga, because even if there is an arc or a portion that I feel falls off from the rest of the story, there is always the possibility of the story picking itself back up and once again becoming good. However, this wasn't the case. I am starting to say that unfortunately, Jujutsu Kaisen is one of the biggest disappointments I have ever had the displeasure of reading in my life. Gege Akutami has proven himself to be an incredibly flawed author who, after witnessing how he has handled his ending and portions prior to the ending, I have started to question if he even understands how to write a story. Multiple disregarded plotlines, and not just some insignificant ones, but world-changing events and would have been character-defining moments just thrown out the window. Majority of the characters feeling more like action figures and hollow shells that serve as Gege's avatars to argue with the reader than actual people. A whole 100 plus chapters long arc that ultimately served zero purpose inside the story aside from introducing 3 semi-important characters, of which only one actually did something useful, dedicating a chapter or sometimes even more into explaining an ability of a character to then never use it again. A stretch of 40 plus chapters where Gege just threw characters into a blender, only for us to realize that they came out just fine in the end. Probably one of, if not the worst aspo I have seen not just in manga, but storytelling as a whole. And finally, and most importantly, an ending that not only didn't even feel like a conclusion to a story, but also an ending that actively left the world of this universe in a far worse state than it was in the beginning. Yet, for some unexplainable reason, our characters just smile year to year and ride off towards the sunset. An ending where I, for the first time in my almost 2 decades of experiencing stories, felt like the author himself mocked me for even being remotely interested in his story for the past couple of years. The first stretch up until Shibuya, whilst still not the greatest piece of literature ever written, looks like a masterpiece written by God himself when you compare it to what comes after it. The fall-off is so abysmal that it actually made me put a tinfoil hat on and actually start believing in the Shizu theory of Gregory not fully writing the first stretch of the story by himself and having massive amounts of help from an editor. Because no way a man can fuck up so badly to a point I start questioning if they even wrote their own story. Even things established early on never went anywhere. Take the discrimination of female characters in the JJK world. Momo, the little witch girl, tells us that girls need to be perfect, both in skill and appearance-wise. A scar on a girl's face can be seen as a negative. We also have one of the antagonists, Naoya, who continues that aspect of the story with his misogynistic tendencies towards Maki. But that's all about there is to it. Aside these 2 examples, we aren't made to believe that this is actually something that actually happens in the world. Utahime, by all accounts, should be a prime example for this plot. She has a massive scar across her face, yet no one ever brings it into question. Quite the opposite. She is a semi-grade 1 sorcerer and a respected teacher. No one ever mentions her appearance, even though we are told a scar as big as hers should be a big issue. Even when we go to other female characters, they are never really treated any differently than the male cast. Mei Mei, Yuki, Nobara, Miwa, all of them face no harsh treatment. Only one to do so is Maki, and it's mainly done by none other than Naoya, her designated antagonist. Even the Zenin Kwan, in all of the 5 chapters of its existence, never really delved deeper into that. Even when Maki's body is covered in scars and should become a problem for her, it's never mentioned by anyone aside from Naoya. Maki was more ostracized about her not having cursed energy and being born a twin more than being a woman. Even with Naoya, it felt he was more pissed off about Maki being compared to Toji than anything else. Gege tried telling us that females face discrimination in the Jujutsu world, yet almost everything we are shown contradicts that statement. Then we have things that are connected with the power system, more specifically binding vows. Since very early on we are given an explanation that a binding vow is a power-up, where you give something away to earn something in exchange, and if the binding vow is broken, the effects granted will disappear. Okay, that's fine and all, but the way this thing is used is very questionable. On one side, you have Sukuna that can massively increase his domain range by just having an escape route, so he might as well not have a negative. You have Nanami's overtime, where he only uses 80% of his power until after his 9 to 5 hours, where it reaches 120% after set hours. And then you have Miwa, that has the negative of never using a sword again in order for massive increase in power. However, her attack against Kenjaku not only didn't harm him at all, he straight up breaks her blade. I get that Kenjaku was never going to be defeated by Miwa, but making what is probably the harshest binding vow in the series for it to basically do nothing is a joke. A joke that becomes even funnier considering how Miwa is no longer a character after that moment. But then you have the second version of a binding vow, one made between two people, and that in itself isn't the important part. The one I am looking at is the consequences of breaking a binding vow between two people. Throughout the whole story, we are told over and over again that the punishment is so severe that even powerhouses like Kenjaku and Sukuna aren't willing to test and break one due to them not knowing what's the penalty going to be. However, up until the end, we are never shown what actually happens if one is broken. How am I, as a reader, to believe it is this super dangerous thing to break if I am never told what happens? At the very least, it isn't something that truly makes a difference in the story, unlike when close to the end of the Killing Games, our friend Sukuna drops a massive war bomb that he has the title of The Fallen. Why does he have it, and how did he get it? We are never told. Why is Angel specifically the one trying to kill him? Is Gege making parallels to Lucifer or something related to Buddhism, since it already has some other elements used from it? We don't know, and we will never know, since one chapter later that reveal is pretty much swept under the rug and never mentioned again. And whilst we're talking about reveals that appear and are never mentioned again, Kenjaku being Yuji's mother is pretty much a pointless reveal. Not only are there zero interactions between the two, Yuji's creation has zero meaning towards Kenjaku's plans. Sukuna is like a failsafe, a contingency plan if something goes wrong with the Prism Realm, so Yuji, being a vessel for Sukuna, wasn't really his intended purpose. Well, there is one thing that came out of him being Itadori's mother, and that is that Kaori just so happened to have a curse technique based around anti-gravity, a perfect and convenient counter to Yuki's black hole that not only did he not know she could do, not only did he not know Yuki's curse technique, and he himself was caught off guard by, so he probably never intended to be attacked with such a technique, and therefore there would be no reason to specifically go around and search for such a power, yet lo and behold, the body that he more than likely previously inhabited before Geto just so happened to have this power. That brings another question. In the official fanbook, it is stated that once Kenjaku moves bodies, the curse technique of the old body goes away, so Kenjaku would have had to switch to Geto and immediately eaten Kaori's body. But at the same time, the time difference between Geto dying and the main story starting is about a year, yet Yuji seemingly has no memories of his mother and father, even though he should have been around 14 years old when Kenjaku took over Geto. So, Kenjaku got backshotted, gave birth, stayed with the Itadoris for about a year, and then fucked off somewhere for 13 years, whilst for some reason still using Kaori's body for all that time, without switching to somebody else. Yeah, I don't really believe that. Also, we never really get any confirmation about what happened with Yuji's dad. We see him in the flashback, and that's about it. I guess the Kenjutsu was just too strong for poor little Jin. Next up, the Culling Games. Complete and utter waste of time. Literally only 2 characters could even barely be called important from all of the new extras that got introduced via Higuruma and Takaba. Everybody else was some form of actual filler, but more egregiously than that, the whole point of there being any Culling Games, the merger never happened. The constant excuse for the merger never happening is the rule that everyone except for Megumi/Sukuna must die for it to start. And guess what? That is an incredibly shit decision. If you don't intend to reach this apocalyptic event, or at the very least release an incomplete version of it that the characters could possibly stop after activation, do not set it up for half of the runtime of your story. Imagine if the rumbling didn't happen after years of build-up. Imagine Infinite Tsukuyomi never activating, or we never get to see the Gun Devil, something we were going for since the beginning of the story. It is not a matter of if the rule allowed it or not in universe, it's a matter of if Gege allowed it or not. There was no reason at all for him to write this rule, where this event only happens if everyone but Sukuna is dead. Just by this, you are telling the reader that either the merger will never happen, or that Sukuna will win and everyone is fucked. And considering that this is a shonen manga, it was always going to be the former option. And if the major event didn't even happen, imagine what that means for everything else. Spending a whole chapter or sometimes multiple in explaining a power only for said character or power to disappear the following chapter. Take Kirara, the first of many, dedicating so much time in explaining his constellation abilities, an ability that is admittedly really cool and could have been used in so many other fights, but instead of that, right after his fight with Megumi, Kirara disappears from the story, only reappearing for a panel or two to make a reaction face. Same thing for the French mangaka, he appears only for Hakari to have a fight. Gege spends a chapter for both of them to explain their respective abilities, and right after that, the French guy is defeated and removed from the story, only to reappear for a panel for Yuta's copy ability. The funnier thing about the French mangaka is that he really isn't needed, because right after him, Hakari goes to fight Kashimo, who served the exact same purpose of us getting more information about Hakari's abilities. And whilst we are on Kashimo, what a waste of a cool character and design. His fight with Hakari still remains my favorite, but if we look at the story as a whole, Kashimo did absolutely nothing. From his introduction, he is shown to be a force to be feared, and someone who explicitly wants to fight against Sukuna. Lo and behold, his wish is granted, and he gets effortlessly dispatched in 2 chapters. Kashimo was never going to be the one to kill Sukuna, but having him do absolutely nothing, whilst people like Higuruma, a person who was a sorcerer for like 2 months, had at the very least some impact in tipping the scales. But this legendary sorcerer with a, from what we are shown, a pretty strong power, dies instantly. Joke after joke after joke with this story. At the very least, Kashimo had some cool moments and an incredible fight, something I cannot say for a majority of the other characters. People like Regi, Uro, Ryu, the cockroach dude, the helicopter dude, all of them nothing but action figures made to do cool fights between one another and then disappear when no longer needed, be them alive or not. Most of these characters were either killed one way or another, captured by the military, or their name is Uro, who saw Meguna and fled, never to be seen again, even during the so-called epilogue. Speaking of the military, another major plotline that was set up during the Culling Games was Kenjaku going around the governments of major countries and revealing the Jujutsu world to them. The USA military wanted to be the first to exploit the opportunity of using sorcerers, real people, as semi-generators. They sent an army to invade Japan in order to steal some of its citizens, and they almost managed to do so by capturing the girl with the ponytail and the helicopter guy, but were wiped out by the curses. And then, after the soldiers are killed, that's that. Never mentioned again. I am so sorry, but even if we overlook the fact of another country invading yours and trying to harm your citizens is more than enough for a conflict between Japan and America to start, almost every major country is now eyeing Japan into using its people for energy. America may have failed this time, but who is to say that another batch of soldiers won't come tomorrow from them, or from China, or Russia, or whoever? And considering how the fight between Gojo and Sukuna was broadcasted, pretty much the whole world now knows about sorcerers, so other countries would be even more eager to invade, considering there is proof of this cursed energy being real. Yeah, Megumi is saved from Sukuna, but what is he going to do next week when he has the barrel of an AR pointed at his face and forcibly captured? I guess we don't have to wonder about that too hard. After all, the ending told us that everything is fine and dandy. Look at them all smiling happily. Let's end off the Culling Games with one of my favorite characters who was done extremely dirty, Choso. Most of the time, his whole personality was "I love my brothers," and that was about it, which, while endearing, wasn't anything special. But there was another part of his that really stuck out. Him feeling distraught for choosing to live as a curse, for dooming his little brothers, for choosing the easy way out. Him killing his brothers and all those people in Shibuya made him feel unworthy of living next to Yuji as a human. That's why his fight with Kenjaku is so meaningful, sacrificing himself in the hopes of being strong enough to at the very least give Yuji a better life and proving himself worthy to stand beside the humans. Yuki saying he died as a curse on the battlefield and now can continue on living as a human was an amazing scene and an amazing moment. So moving forward a bit, and Choso is unfortunately killed by Sukuna, trying to protect his beloved little brother Yuji. In return, what does said little brother do? What does this person who Choso has non-stop showered with love feel after his unfortunate end? "Thanks, bro," said Yuji, and then immediately forgot about him. Well, they are in the middle of a fight, I told myself. Surely during the epilogue there would be a mourning period. Hell, the least they can do is give Choso a few panels of a grave and a funeral, a ritual that is connected to humans, to show us and to confirm that he did indeed manage to live and die as a human. Turns out, however, nobody really gave any shit for Choso, not for him and not for anybody else that died, because every single one of them were pretty much forgotten after they died. Death is something that this manga handled extremely poorly. After Shibuya, Gojo went out with not a single person showing any disbelief or sadness. You saw your teacher that saved your life get bisected. Your stepfather that took you under his wing got inadvertently murdered by your own hands. Show some love, respect, tears. Do something to make me believe that you are an actual character and not just an action figure. But of course, be it because Gregorius just genuinely hates Gojo or just wanted to squeeze one more hype moment out of him because that is all he knows what to do, he makes Yuta take control of his body that led to nowhere and ultimately ended by Gojo's last present day panel being his lifeless corpse face planting on the ground. Where is his body now? What happened to it? Only Ymir knows this answer. For all we know, it was thrown out in some trash bin. And while we are on Yuta, why did we spend so much time on saying how there would be massive consequences of him using Kenjaku's technique if nothing happened in the end? Every option that was listed to us pretty much told us that Yuta was going to die if he did the swap, but then third to last chapter he is fine and dandy with only a cool scar on his forehead. Real monster right there. How about we go to Kenjaku, whose conclusion was so shitty that I, up until the last page of the last chapter of the manga, believed he was going to come back in some way. No information to his relationship with Sukuna and Tengen from the Heian era, no explanation to what he actually is, why he started this 1000-year-long plan, was Yuji really made for shits and giggles, or did he had some other plans for him? So many questions and none of them answered. If Gege was never going to do anything with the merger, which is pretty much Kenjaku's whole reason to exist in the story, then he should have just killed him alongside Yuki. That way, you make Yuki into an actual competent fighter who managed to kill off the secondary antagonist and not just another female character that did absolutely nothing of importance in the story. And you would have had Kenjaku lose to something so specific that even he, the mastermind that he is, wouldn't have predicted such an ability being out there. In the same vein, dying during the barrier fight also boosts Choso's character, since he would have, or at the very least, would have been a big part of avenging his little brothers. But instead of that, Kenny got a convenient ass pull and then did nothing up until he had a Shizu fight with Takaba and got beheaded by Yuta, destroying any interest in both him and Yuki out of the story. Truly, the mastermind antagonist of all time. Also, who is that Kenjaku lookalike that is accompanying Takaba in the end? Only Ymir knows that answer. Kashimo isn't even worth mentioning, same way how no one inside the actual story ever says his name again after he dies. Tsumiki is another one. I challenge you to find me one person who gives a fuck about this character in the real world, and one character that gives a fuck in the story outside of Megumi. Even when it comes to Megumi, I really cannot see why he would care so much besides them being family, considering we have seen Tsumiki for a total of 3 chapters, where she was already Yoruzu in the 3rd chapter. Also, Yoruzu taking over Tsumiki, whilst it was somewhat foreshadowed, and by that I mean her opening her eyes when Kenjaku summoned the incarnated sorcerers. She was pretty much a waste of a character and only served to prove that Tsumiki was nothing than a plot device. So neither hers nor Yoruzu's death left any impression on me, except maybe anger for what may have been but never was. All of these examples, and not even mentioning the fake out deaths during the Sukuna fight, primarily speaking Higuruma and Kusakabe, who presumably died, yet at the 3rd to last chapter are back with just a few scratches. We all had some hopium at the start of the fight. They aren't saying anything because they're in a fight. After the battle is over, they will mourn the people they have lost. We all told ourselves blindly, and that was to be expected, right? Many other shows, some of which are set in universes far worse than this one, always found time to mourn their fallen comrades. They are Jujutsu sorcerers. They are hardened from having to fight every day. So that's why they show no emotion, is what someone may try to say as an excuse, and to that I say bullshit. Attack on Titan had teenagers join the military to fight against man-eating giants every day, risking their lives every day, yet they all shed tears and grieved when someone died. Every ninja in Naruto is pretty much a child soldier, yet they still mourn people when they die. In Jujutsu Kaisen though, it doesn't matter if it's some random bum or your stepfather that died. Neither tears nor words of gratitude will be given. The only deaths that actually affected people are Junpei and Nanami. Yuji was distraught when he had to kill Junpei, eating him up inside even chapters later after the deed was already done, and Nanami, although it still happened during an actual fight, just like with Junpei, Yuji showed his sadness and grief towards his mentor's death. You know what's even funnier about that? Jogo might have been right all along. Jogo, the cursed spirit, showed more emotion towards Hanami and Dagon's deaths than anyone ever showed towards Gojo, Choso, and Kashimo. Even in Jogo's death, he was thinking how he wishes they meet again in the future, while the bum Gojo died glazing Sukuna and hoping he stayed dead. The cursed spirits might have actually been the real humans all along. At least when one of them died, the others mourned them. Their deaths were handled with some respect. It's a lot more than I can say about the next example. Almost a year ago, I made a video about how I could see Sukuna going the same direction Madara went, of becoming so powerful that Gege would have no actual realistic way of defeating him, unless Sukuna won or an Aspu is used. Back then, I called this the Madara problem, but it may be due time to rename it to the Sukuna problem, because as horrible of an Aspu, Bwakuzetsu, and in turn Kaguya were, Nobara's return is that times 100. Not only does it diminish Yuji's victory over Sukuna, who by all means should have been killed with Yuji's domain, yet her resonance was the deciding factor of the fight. Not only does it remove any impact her death brought, especially when it comes to Mahito's strength, but it also brings into question why nobody mentioned her health until the very last second. Utahime says Nobara has been up for about half an hour, so they pretty much knew she was alive, or at the very least, stable for quite a while. This brings up the question of why didn't they wait an hour longer for her to wake up in order to spam resonance during Gojo's fight with Sukuna? And even if Nobara just miraculously woke up and jumped out of bed 30 minutes ago, why did Yuta never get Rika to eat a limb or something in order to copy her ability that clearly counters Sukuna if Nobara truly was a lost cause, as we were made to believe for the last 3 years? Then just getting her ability should be the first thing on Yuta's mind. Consent this, consent that. Wasn't Yuta supposed to be a monster? Why is consent important now? Besides, if my ability could counter and tip the scales of a fight against the greatest threat right now, what's losing a limb or two? It sure is better than waking up to everyone being killed, Japan destroyed, and the Demon Lord walking around freely. Also, which person was actually able to fix the soul damage? And not just on like a hand or a leg, but her head. Did Mahito just forget to kill her? Did he just do a bit of trolling and only transfigured her eyeball? Or was it simply that Gregorius had no real intention of bringing her back up until the very last moment? Explaining why we were told multiple times she is dead, why we never got any progress on her condition, and why even after returning she went back to being nothing but a background character once again. But what pisses me off the most about this Nobara situation is that she is probably one of the worst cases for a fake out death I have ever seen. As a whole, I hate this trope with a passion in any media I read. Even though I might be one of Horikoshi's biggest glazers, Bakugo's fake out still remains as one of the worst aspects of My Hero Academia. But do you know what separates cases like Bakugo to Nobara? After his so-called death, we actually got to see the other characters try to resurrect him a few chapters later, so even if he wasn't on the screen, we always knew that he would pop up at some point. Nobara didn't have that. She died and that was it. The 2 times she was mentioned afterwards, the characters pretty much confirmed her death. Having her return 5 chapters before the ending was for nothing else but a final cool scene and the last minute Aspu with which Sukuna could be defeated. Moving on to some smaller problems I will just speed run through. Megumi never reaching his full potential and completing his domain, even though Yuji managed to do it in a month. Megumi having pretty much zero development and ending the story pretty much the exact same way as he started it. Yuji's domain having no name, which seems kinda stupid to put as a negative. At the end of the day, we are reading a shonen manga, and cool ultimate move names is pretty much a must. If every other domain has a name, so should the one the MC uses. Yuji's domain's powers never being explained. I can pretty much guess what it does, but with no clear explanation, my guess is as good as a headcanon. And in a series that explains pretty much every attack in full detail, it's strange how Yuji's domain is the one that receives zero explanation. Yuko, what was her whole deal about? Todo and Utahime's scars, where did they come from? Todo never interacting with Yuki. Who is Angel? What's her deal? For a character that is so similar to Sukuna and a character that presumably knew him from the past, we get almost nothing about her. Geto's body moving on its own against Kenjaku. I know it's stated to be nothing but like a twitch from a dead insect. However, considering how Geto was the first and only one to do so, and right after seeing and hearing words from his best friend no less, no way that was a coincidence, especially after Kenny has been in Geto's body for like a year at that point. Chapter 269 as a whole should be considered a crime against storytelling. Wasting your precious few pages during chapter 270 for killing game characters that nobody gives a shit about was truly a decision. A lot of characters getting development one page before they die, like Nobara, Toji and Sukuna, where before that they were simply a one-note character. Uraume vs Hikari, a fight that never existed. Gojo vs Sukuna, a fight that had more reaction panels than actual fight panels. I pray Mappa's slaves are going to fix these two things. Moving on, not a single panel of mourning dead comrades, nor any gravestones aside from Tsumiki, a girl who had a total of 2 chapters as herself. Tengen's barriers are slowly disappearing, yet no one gives a fuck. Japan's economy has been plummeting ever since Shibuya, and finally the whole of Tokyo is as good as nuked, yet once again no one gives a fuck. Before going to the final chapter, let me talk about Sukuna for a bit. This guy got so much plot armor, it's actually insane. He breaks his binding vow with Yuji by harming Hana, and a punishment is never given. Then this guy does binding vow after binding vow over and over again with almost zero negatives on his side, yet other characters don't do that nearly as much, if at all, when they easily could have. He got a get out of jail free card from Higuruma's domain by receiving a curse tool in one chapter that he lost 4 chapters later. Also, it's pretty convenient how Higuruma, who has spent all his time up until Yuji's arrival fighting other sorcerers and training with his domain, yet for some reason didn't know that Judgment will confiscate the tool first. You are telling me, after fighting so many people to get 100 points, he wouldn't have fought a single person with a curse tool? I find this really hard to believe. Then we have Hana being tricked by Sukuna, even though Angel was warning her. We know that Angel does not want to fully incarnate and take over Hana's body, so her forcibly stopping her by taking over is out of the question. But at the same time, before the fight, Yuji, Hana, Angel and Megumi spent a lot of time inside of a room together. In said room, 3 people know that Sukuna plays dirty in a fight. So even though Hana herself doesn't have first-hand experience fighting Sukuna, there are 3 people there that could have explained to her that whatever happens, she shouldn't trust a single word that comes out of the possessed body. Also, can we just say that Sukuna surviving a whole purple almost at point blank range was absolute bullshit? And that's not even counting the multiple other things that he shouldn't have survived. Then we have my favorite line of the series from Uraume about Sukuna not fighting at full strength, completely destroying the tension in the Sukuna vs Gojo fight and removing any meaning from the line "I shall remember you for as long as I am alive." Alongside all these things, I feel Gege just doesn't know what Sukuna is. At first, he's just pure evil, someone like Dio. Then he starts respecting every other sorcerer that fights him. Maki stabbed him once and he starts glazing her. Todo disorientated him for a bit and then he starts glazing him. Higuruma manages to do some damage and he starts glazing him. Yet Yuji does more than everyone else in the battlefield, yet he continues to look down upon this worthless brat in quotations, almost to a comedic extent. Up until his very last page in his Guop appearance, where he shows some amounts of fear and respect by calling him by his name. He is unfeeling yet respectful. He is pure evil, but then he isn't. What is he? This could very easily be fixed, amongst other things, by doing a Hyanera flashback so we can see more of his original motivations and life. Yet, that never happens. One thing that remained throughout the whole story is his value of strength. If someone is stronger, then that means they are right. So him accepting to start over and try going a different route in the third to last page in the manga was in character. But in Gege fashion, he gives us yet another unanswered question by giving us two paths for Sukuna that he might have chosen before, one Uraume and one we have no idea who it might be. Is it Yoruzu, his mother, a lover? No idea, just some girl with black hair. We know next to nothing about Sukuna, and some may say that not every character needs a fleshed out background to be good, and I call that bullshit. Dio is a one note I am evil because it's mad funny to be evil character, yet I know almost every aspect of his life, from childhood to his death, which made it even more interesting to watch him. Sukuna is basically a stronger than average jobber. I truly wonder what happened when Gege wrote Mahito. Did the ghost of Tolkien take over him for a while to create a character that was not only interesting to follow, but had a thematic significance to be in the story, was a great foil for the protagonist, and actually felt threatening without needing to have a character die every 2 or 3 chapters, or at least pretend to die, and in the end had a great conclusion? What happened, Gege? Where did the Gege from the first 130 chapters go? But then we have the last chapter, the last small portion of the story that Gege has been crafting for the last 6 years. Most authors would tell you that they always have their endings made up first, or at least have a vague idea of what it might be before starting to write everything else. How does the curtain fall for the Jujutsu Kaisen universe? By having our main trio do a random mission, a flashback of Gojo and Yuji talking, where Gege gives one last middle finger to his beloved cash cow by saying, haven't we had enough of Satoru Gojo, and how at least one person should forget about him. Do not worry, buddy. Nobody remembers you after you served your purpose. We have a couple of pages of Sukuna development, 3 chapters before the curtains fall. The main cast is all smiling and walking towards the sunset, and the final page is the old place where Sukuna's finger was first found at, showing us Yuji putting the now useless finger inside it, a big page of Sukuna's middle finger directed towards the reader. To be honest, no idea if it was actually the middle finger, but it's funnier to think that it was. The very last panel, the thing you close down the universe and story with, is a middle finger directed to you, the reader. Thanks for reading all these years and giving me your money, loser. In conclusion for all this yapping, you know, I can forgive a lot of things. I can forgive Nobara's fake out, the ass pull to kill Sukuna, the fact that the 1 versus 1 fight between Yuji and Sukuna, a fight set up from chapter 1, was shorter than most other fights in the story. I can forgive how the economy is flushed down the drain. I can forgive Tokyo being as good as nuked. I can forgive the world knowing that sorcery exists now. I can forgive that the military is probably going to try again and again to invade, capture, and exploit cursed energy. I can forgive how most characters didn't have any meaningful development from the bare minimum. I can forgive there not being a merger I can forgive how female characters were basically more discriminated against by their own author than the people in the world of the story, by having them only be used as pretty pictures that occasionally may have the privilege of having a fight or two, while obviously either never winning said fight or only winning because a man helped them. I can forgive the constant use of binding vows that, let's be real here, was only ever a convenient exit door for Gege to write whatever he wants an ability to do without really caring about his power system and what a character may have as an advantage or disadvantage due to their arsenal. I can forgive some characters disappearing from the story then reappearing when they are needed without proper build-up beforehand. Todo, Miguel. I can forgive how the entirety of the Sukuna fight had basically no tension in the end, because even if something went wrong, next chapter immediately tells us that the characters had already planned out that outcome happening. Everything in the fight was planned out from the start till the finish. We just didn't know it at the time as readers. I can forgive wasting a whole chapter of your epilogue on simple domain and starting and ending a mini plot arc in a couple of pages. I can forgive characters not mourning the friends that have died, even though that wasn't the case early on in the series. I can forgive there being pretty much zero flashbacks to flesh out characters aside from Gojo, Geto, and Toji. I can forgive how Yuji's motivation to have a proper death, something his character revolved around for a majority of the story, since chapter 1 never went anywhere. I can forgive many things, but do you know what I will never ever forgive? How even with everything I listed above, with a lot of their friends gone, with Japan being in a crisis, how Tengen's barrier slowly goes away and cursed spirits will be even more rampant, with how now that everyone knows about curses and such, their fears will skyrocket and that will breed even more curses, with how everyone else around the world is currently looking to capture people to use as human batteries, with how pretty much every Jujutsu sorcerer's life will be even more hellish from this day on, even with everything. What I can't forgive is how nobody gives a fuck. Nobody gives a fuck about anything. Not for their friends, not for the danger they are in, not for the state of Japan, not for anything. Why are they smiling in the final pages? What is there to smile about? Why did we waste so much time on simple domains and culling game characters where there is infinitely more important stuff to worry about in the world? I will tell you why. It's because the people drawn on the paper are not characters. They are action figures. Figures that Gege like to play with, especially Sukuna, Toji, Yuta, and somewhat Yuji. Every time a figurine broke, he simply threw it away. He couldn't fight and play with it any longer, so there really wasn't any point in keeping it. He was so distraught when he broke his favorite Toji, he settled for making a copy of it with Maki. Even when he was playing with this figurine, he just couldn't help himself to reminisce about his favorite Toji and his poor little Gojo figure. He really didn't like to play with that one, to the point of storing it away for a couple of years. But the other kids loved that figure. So even if he didn't want to, he chose to pick it up again for just a while and break it using his own favorite figure, Sukuna. Thankfully for him, the other kids also loved Sukuna, so some might whine at first. He managed to break and throw away the Gojo figure. He then played and played and played again until he was satisfied. But action figures are only interesting when they fight. But when they actually have to have a dialogue, well, that is a problem now. Chapter 269 was a chapter full of dialogue, but not between people, but between robots. I have had more lively arguments in my post-game chats on League than these so-called characters. So at the end of the day, why would an action figure care that another one broke Why would a stepson care about killing his own stepfather with his own bare hands? Why would a little brother care, let alone make a grave for the big brother that gave away his own life to protect and love him? Why would you care for the citizens of your own country you so-called sorcerers are trying to protect? Why would a long-lasting friend who already had to see one of the trio go the wrong path and then get not only murdered but defiled after that care for the other remaining friend of hers that got brutally bisected and then had to not only watch his corpse also get defiled, but she actively had to tinker with it for that to happen? Why would an action figure care about any of that? So my question is, why should you, the viewer, care as well? Gege Akutami has cemented himself as a writer that from now on I will be actively avoiding and will actively be discouraging others from reading anything from him, be it his own work or something written in collaboration alongside another writer. Never have I ever felt so disrespected and made fun of from an author for ever daring to care for the story, characters, and world he has written. He showed me his middle finger and spat on me for ever thinking of giving years of my life to following his work and hoping for it to get better. I even gave him the benefit of the doubt by rereading his entire story a week after its conclusion, just to make sure I haven't forgotten something, due to the nature of the weekly release, something that I have never done for another work. Yet what I found was more problems than I originally remembered. Gege Akutami didn't care to make a story, he only wanted to play with action figures. So I shall do that as well and play with you. Let's make a binding vow, the power you so love to use during the ending. As you asked of me, the reader, I shall forget about Satoru Gojo, and in exchange, I shall forget about anything about Jujutsu Kaisen and you as a writer. And if, for some reason, I break this vow one day, I shall sleep soundly, knowing that nothing will happen, because you yourself couldn't be bothered to think of a punishment. I hope that the idol manga you talked about before brings you more joy than whatever this story excuse of a story ever did. Stand ashamed, Akutami, you were the worst storyteller in Shonen Jump. Also, before I close out this video, just as a quick side note, for the guys making Jujutsu no Kaisen, as horribly as Gege managed to fumble, I promise you that on blood you aren't making anything better.